We're going to get this webinar started. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Good morning and afternoon, or wherever you are. I'm going to go over a little bit of ADI business really quickly, and then talk about how the questions will work during this session, and then I'll introduce our panelists, and we'll be off to the races. I'll try and do all of that as quickly as possible. So this isn't like a podcast where you get all excited to listen to it, and then there's a 20-minute commercial before you actually get to the podcast. So here we go. We started offering for the first time this year an ADI Spring Bundle, we called it. Basically, it's membership and one ticket to our conference in August combined at a discount of $200. That's been so popular, we were going to cut it off today, which is where when early bird pricing was supposed to stop. But we've gained about 75 members since we started doing this. It's been really exciting for us. So we're going to actually extend it through the end of the month, including the early bird. I put the link in the chat. So anybody that's interested in finding that, you don't have to hunt and peck for it. It's right there. We certainly would love for you to take advantage of that. And as I said, it's not some piddly 5 or 10% off. You're saving $200 if you make the assumption that you'd like to do those two things, join ADI and come to the conference. The questions, we have between the four of us, we have some topics to cover and some things that we thought made sense and that were, seem to come up often and were certainly regular points of pain for all of us. But if you have questions as we go along, please put them in the Q&A. That should be wide open for all the attendees. And I'll keep an eye on that and pitch those questions to Robert, Dave, and Pete. And if it happens to be topical, exactly what we're discussing, I might throw it in. If it's not, or if it's something we've covered a little bit already, we'll wait till the end to get to those. So don't think that just because you put a question in the Q&A and I don't immediately jump on it means that we're not going to get around to it. So just hold tight on that. But if you want to know more about something that we're talking about or go down a different sort of tangent, please just shoot that in the Q&A and we'll get to it. And with that, I'm going to introduce the fellas and let them talk a little bit about themselves and how they wound up in the industry and sort of the space that they occupy. And we'll start with my upper left, Robert Licorice.
How's it going, everybody? Name's Robert Licorice. I'm one of the owners and founders of Iron Root Republic Distilling. We're in Denison, Texas. We started about 11 years ago now, so survived. We've done it. Small family business distillery. It's my brother, my mother, myself started it. Mom's the big boss at the distillery, as I'm sure it is with all of us. We're located about an hour north of Dallas. I got into this when I was getting ready to graduate law school, decided I didn't want to be a lawyer and decided I wanted to do something with my hands. So I started kind of traveling and trading lawyerly advice for education in distilling, fell in with ADI and took some classes, and the rest is kind of history from there.
Dave, you want to go next?
Yeah. I'll try to be brief because when I do this, I realize how old I am. I kind of started on the retail end of the business, working all sorts of positions in bars, restaurants, nightclubs, and whatnot. And from there, started a promotions agency for big brands around the country, doing a lot of entertainment-based on-premise promotion. And after years of doing that, like any good actor, you think you know how to direct. So I started a vodka brand in the early 2000s, which was a very expensive education. But the best part about it was the friends made along the way, other lack of a better word, idiots doing the same thing I am. And, got to meet a lot of really great people who were importing, contract manufacturing, and a lot of people who started distilling, which was kind of a new thing back then for a local person to do. And kind of out of that created the Indie Spirits Expo, which we did in New York, Chicago, San Fran, and the small one at Tales, which we're still doing today, which is just a small forum for brands to participate and show what they're doing to both the trade and consumers. So we had a lot of distributor participation in the early years of that. In 2010, co-founded Redemption Rye, sold that in 2015, and started Proof and Wood about almost 10 years ago, which is a company. We have a whole bunch of brands as well as bulk whiskey sales and things of that nature. And that's kind of the short version.
Awesome. And the best for last, Pete.
I don't know about all that. Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. So just kind of piggyback on what Dave alluded to a minute ago. It's, the culture of this industry is fantastic. And that's one of the things that, even when we face headwinds like we do today, the people for the most part are still great, certainly on the producer side. We're going to talk about the distributor side and some of those other tiers in a little bit. But no, my wife and I founded this company together 12 years ago. When we started the company, I think there were about 275 DSPs in the US. Today, there's more than 3,000, I think. So I guess we were kind of early adopters. The question is, how do we get into this business? Because we've got a big family farm. We thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do a winery and vineyard on the family farm, right? We started looking at that business model. We're like, oh, no, run fast. But even though I'm from North Carolina, we both went to school in Northern California and kind of watched these little companies like Sierra Nevada and Ballast Point be very disruptive. And we thought that was awesome. And we saw the same opportunities a dozen years ago in the spirit space. Unlike Dave and, maybe more similarly to Robert, I came from a very different world. I was an engineer by training, did a lot of process engineering, did a lot of manufacturing plants around the world. And so when we decided that we wanted to build a distillery, we came about it from maybe a different vantage point. We built a pretty big craft distillery, so maybe 1.3 million proof gallons a year, so 20,000 plus or minus barrels a year. Our business is really subdivided into two things. We support today about 160 clients that we help with their products. But we also have our own product line that we're really, really proud of called Southern Star. And so, still trying to figure out how to build a brand. Dave is, I think everybody's hero. He's figured that out a couple of times. We're really good at making stuff, not as good at selling stuff on the branded side of the space. So that's, even though we've been doing this a while, we're still learning. But no, I'm just excited to chat about this today. We've made a lot of mistakes when it comes to distribution and how to go to market. So I'm happy to share all the things not to do, right? And hopefully somebody can take something from that. So thank you.
I hear that, Pete. I think I don't know, I assume that the other two guys are in the same boat. Not only have I made every mistake, some of them I made 2 or 3 times just to be sure.
Yeah.
Just to be
We
absolutely
never
sure.
learn, do we?
They were mistakes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We couldn't possibly screw it up that bad again, right, John?
Yeah, no. It couldn't happen. That bad lightning couldn't strike twice, right?
Right.
So, all right, well, let's start with that. So how do you get, I'm assuming everybody on the call has a basic understanding of the need for distributors and the 3-tier system. And if you're so new to it that you need to know that kind of stuff, shoot me an email, or actually you're going to get a survey at the end of this of what you'd want to hear more about. Maybe we should have a session on that. But I'm assuming that everybody is driving at least 35 miles per hour right now and understands that stuff. So how do you find one? I mean, you can see what your competitors, who they're using. You can ask a friend. You can Google it. You go to a retailer. But how do let's say you're going into Oklahoma and you don't know anything about Oklahoma except where it is on the map. How do you find somebody? Robert, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean,
Anybody
Google's
want
a
to jump
really
in?
good friend on that end.
Yeah.
For me, the way that we always started looking at distributors were one, talking to, again, friends that are already distributing in that area of who they use, who's in the space. I mean, generally you're going to see one of the big guys, either Southern or RNDC or someone along those lines. And also, if there's my suggestion is going into accounts that to really appeal to you. I mean, it's something that would really where you feel like your brand would do really well. Go into those accounts, whether it's stores, whether it's restaurants, and talk to them about their experiences with different distributors in that state. kind of what they experience on that end. And I can give you some really good insight on that side of how that different distributors are perceived by the industry within that state. Because even when it comes to the big guys like Southern or RNDC or Breakthrough, it's different in every state, and it's gonna be different for different types of accounts. So for me, that's always a place that I go to first, is going in, finding accounts that really speak to me, and then talking to them.
To
What do you?
follow up on that,
Yeah, go for it.
one of the, it's really always been a great strategy, and I think we'll get to this at some point, but it's really tough right now. Distributors in general have more products and more inventory than they want. So they're not necessarily looking, so you're gonna have to work harder. That said, Robert's strategy is great. And when you reach out to people who seem to align with what your product's about, not only will they tell you who they like, there's a likelihood they'll introduce you to somebody, which usually carries some weight if they're the right people. And the other thing you can do in today's world is there's a fair amount of regional or city market specific online forums where people are eager to talk to you, and they'll recommend kind of what you do. And then another strategy, again, depending on where you are, if you have a couple of good distributors you work with, you'd be surprised to know that they're friends with distributors in other parts of the country, and that might be a good entryway. There's also there's a group called the Independent Distributors Network, which is a loose group of probably mostly medium-sized to small distributors around the country who are more likely to be a good fit for a smaller brand.
Yeah. I used to I could always find a competitor, a worthy competitor, not just somebody that made, somebody that I thought that I would look good on the shelf next to. I could always find one who listed all of their distributors by state on their website. And I hacked the hell out of that list when I was looking for a new distributor in a market. I was like, if they're good enough to handle this brand that I respect and I like, and they must get a little bit of the world of a small supplier anyway. So a lot of times I would start with them if I couldn't find anybody else. Pete, what do you think about that? You got any insights on how to find somebody good?
Yeah, I think that referrals are hugely important. So, friends don't refer people to losing propositions usually. So, if you've got folks in the industry, and I mean, ADI is a great place to meet those other brands and just ask, okay, hey, I'm in Texas or I'm in North Carolina. What's worked for you? Who's worked for you? So I would say, yeah, ask people you trust. That's probably number one. I think that the other thing to be wary of is that, I think that there's a certain idea that, hey, if it's a bigger distributor, they're going to have more punch. Well, they probably do, but remember their portfolio is a lot bigger as well, and you're going to be ranked way down at the bottom of that portfolio. I think that there's also a fallacy in the industry that, hey, if I go with one of the big guys, they'll be able to take care of me everywhere on this big national push. That's probably not realistic, unless you happen to be a super big celebrity that's going to really have the opportunity to get that push. Quite honestly, we've got relationships with big guys and little guys. A lot of times the little guys really kind of punch above the weight. You're more important to them, not always, but very often, you're a bigger fish in a smaller pond. But remember, you're always going to be a little fish until you're not, right? And that's the main thing. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but we also need to really be realistic about setting expectations about what distributors will do versus what they just aren't going to do. And I know that we'll get into that. I would say that two other things, know your market. How important is on-premise versus off-premise? And really dig into how strong the on versus off-premise teams are at that distributor, because they are different. And the final thing, when you go to present your product, pay attention to the reps. How do they respond? Doesn't matter how the vice president responds. He's going to make you feel like you're the best thing since sliced bread. What's really important is, are those reps looking at their phone, or are they listening to you? At the end of the day, they're the ones that matter.
Yeah. I always felt like, and you're right about the small or boutique distributors, but the caveat to that sometimes is if there's such a heavy wine house and the reps are selling the full book, you know, a lot of times it's hard to get them to sell a bourbon or a rye instead of, you know, the red wine and the Prosecco that they've been paying their mortgages with for years. I always felt like big or small, 20% of a given sales force inside of a distributor is never going to know I exist. They keep selling whatever that they've been selling and they're comfortable with forever. 20% is interested in having something else and different in their bag when they go out and hit the market. And so you have a pretty good chance of hitting those people. And then I felt like 60%, more than half of them, are kind of on the fence. You're going to get in front of them every now and then. They're going to be talking wine with a somm who's going to say, oh, hey, we really want to buy some different, you know, unique whiskeys or something. And then that's kind of how I almost set my expectation, because Pete, you're absolutely right. You got to have a talk with the distributor about their expectations, your expectations, and then eventually apply some case sales and probably some promotional monies eventually to that. What are the right, Pete, I'll start with you since you went last time. What are the right questions for a distributor to ask you? Or what do you, when you leave a first meeting, what do you feel are the right things that they've said that make them a potentially good partner for you?
The things that they've said or the things that they've asked me?
Well, both. What communication from a potential distributor?
Okay, I mean, that's going to be pretty easy. I'm going to tell you, what I want to hear is reality. I don't want to be, you know, overpromised and under-delivered to, right? And so when we've got, you know, distributors telling us, hey, you know, you're fantastic, you're just what we need, and we're really going to help build this brand. That's not realistic. We're all fantastic, right? And they're going to help all of us build these brands. That's not really true, right? What I would much rather that distributor to tell me is, this is what I'm not going to do for you. This is what I can do, and this is what I can't do. And this is what I need you, Mr. Brand Owner, to come in and do to help us be successful. You hardly ever get that unless it's a smaller distributor. I mean, in my experience, but that's what I want to hear. I need to hear the bad news along with the good news. You know, and as far as the questions, if they haven't asked me about how I'm going to support that brand myself and market, we're not going anywhere. You know, what is it that you're going to do to help support on-premise? What kind of programming are you going to be able to offer? If they haven't gone deep into that, do you have boots on the ground? If they haven't gone deep into that, then they're not seriously considering how they're really going to help support us in field, because we know they have a very limited bandwidth. And so what we're really looking for from them is do a great job running your warehouse, do a great job delivering, occasionally do a great job helping me, you know, on accounts, but tell me what you need for me to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that, the flip side to that is, you know, when you're making that pitch or you're having that discussion to the distillery on the DSP end, on our end of things, we need to be ready with some ideas behind that, and we need to know what we're willing to commit instead of, oh, just whatever you need. Because eventually what happens is, even in those small distributors, if somebody else comes along that has more feet on the street than you, or a bigger A&P budget, then pretty soon, even though you're fairly medium-sized fish in this small pond, one of them starts to go to the top, even inside of the scope of a small distributor, I think.
Yeah, the last thing, and I'm going to throw out there, because this is, I think, hugely important, is you need to get a really good understanding of what motivates their reps. I mean, are they an incentive-driven house? You know, are they going to be expected to be paid on every POD versus, you know, because I don't really care about PODs as much as I care about pull-through and depletions, right? You got to have one before you have the other, but at the end of the day, you know, depletions are what matters. But how heavily reliant are on us to provide a lot of dollars for incentive programs, discount programs, rebate programs? You can always buy the business. Most of us don't really want to buy the business.
Right. That's right. Dave?
My favorite question is when they're concerned about, will I have enough product to support their sales?
Yeah,
that tells me they're heading in the right frame of mind, and it's a real question with small suppliers. so it doesn't offend me. So that's all good. But I think generally the conversations, being a smaller brand and being kind of a niche market, that it's always a good sign when the people know my products before we meet, and they have an interest in them,
Bedroom.
get what we're doing, and can kind of communicate that to their customers. It's always really the first thing I look for.
Yeah. Robert?
I think for me, building off of what Dave said, I think that's incredibly important for, again, identifying where their values or where their interests really lie, especially for really small brands. But for me, one of my big things with distributors is communication. It's defining how we're going to communicate, when we're going to communicate, when can I communicate with you, making sure that you've got free flow of information, because that's what tends to break down relationships a lot, is when communication isn't flowing back and forth. And so for me, the ability to speak to people directly, the ability to go in and talk to them directly, to set meetings, to set those things, to set the ride widths, to do all the things that you need to do, being able to communicate and making sure that you're going to be getting responses. And if you don't get responses, what is the upper people going to do if people stop responding to you? I think, to me, that's the biggest thing to define, of like, hey, this is what I need, and making sure that you're able to communicate it. Because, I mean, especially for smaller brands, you're going to be the boots on the street. You're going to be the ones needing to help tell them where they need to send things. And if they're not willing to listen to you, or they don't respond to you, it's going to be a very contentious relationship.
Yeah, and let's not forget that, and we're going to discuss, promotional monies and things like that, A&P, but let's not forget that a distributor, even if you have a bunch of A&P money dedicated, a distributor will only let you spend so much money. They want you to spend some promotional monies, but there's a cap to that, because they also don't want you to come in and steamroll, their best-selling wine for the month of July, because you're throwing out, $200 placements or, something like that. So it's a fine line when you talk about the expectations and the communication, and, and getting inside their promotional calendar, and, and that all is a negotiation in and of itself. And speaking of negotiation,
I've never been accused of that, John.
I wasn't trying to pinpoint you, Dave.
No, that's the opposite of me.
Oh, right. Yeah, right.
Okay.
Well, so speaking of negotiations, let's talk about another of everybody's fun topics, is contracts. I've had relationships with distributors that basically really had no hard and fast contract. I've had people ask me to sign 10-year deals with 5-year without clause buyout options. How do you present that? What's been your experience with seeing those, negotiating those? What's the max you think is fair to the industry to tolerate, and what would you never sign? Robert, we can go with you.
All right,
we'll just keep going.
I guess I'll start out with the story from my first contract here. So when we were first starting in Texas, there was no direct sales allowed. So people couldn't come in and buy bottles. There was absolutely none of that. Everything has to go to the distributor, and obviously then goes to restaurants and everything from there. There are only a handful of distributors in Texas, and when we first started, we only got one of them to respond to us. And so we got stuck we had basically one option. Fortunately with Southern Glazers, and their contract at the time is what was called an evergreen contract. It's a contract that was a 5-year contract, and then on the anniversary of the signing of the contract extends for 1 year. And so it's always essentially 5 years. So basically what they do with that is, to get out of that contract, you have to cancel it basically 5 years in advance, or pay a lot of money to get out of the contract. Or if there's issues, they can release you, but that's at their discretion, not at your discretion. So obviously that is a very difficult situation to be in as a small brand. For us, we didn't really have much of a choice. Now that we've established ourselves and the things are quite a bit different when it comes to negotiation on that side. But just a warning that to watch out for those evergreen contracts, because they can get you stuck in some really bad positions if you are not watching and not paying attention to it. Fortunately for us, that situation has worked itself out, but yeah, that's one of the big things I would say, especially when you're first starting a contract. That's one of the big things for me that's a big red flag, is those evergreen contracts, because it means that they're never going to let you go unless you pay them. And it doesn't give you much of a negotiating side to come to renegotiate terms and to work on setting KPIs and stuff like that. So that's something that, especially if you guys are starting out, that's one of the big things to watch out for.
Dave?
As far as contracts go, quick story is when we started Redemption, most of our distributors were not asking for contracts. They were happy that we were making them money, and we were happy that they were making us money, and everything was great. And we sold, and then I started the new company, and I went back to my good friends at the distributors that I had worked with, and several of them handed me a contract, a document that they called the redemption contract, that they weren't going to let that happen again. To that end, I think the reason for the contract and kind of looking at it from a 360 view is that the distributors are putting a lot of effort and committing to what you're doing. And when they do their job right, everyone's happy. And then sometimes, people move on to a bigger distributor, or they get sold, and the distributor is changed. So there definitely is a reason that they exist, and it's fair to have some compensation there. What you think is fair, I mean, that's always up for debate. I might think 1 to 3 times profit is fair of 1 year's profit. There are contracts out there asking for 7 times 1 year's contract, which, when you do the math, is pretty draconian. The challenge being that in the current environment, most of us have very little leverage. So the contract, it's a thing, it's important, but make sure you're with the right distributor to begin with. As far as mistakes that we've made over and over again, those are some of them I've made. This isn't a good fit, but it's an opportunity, so let's sign this contract. And then particularly, contracts are bad. Worse than contracts and adjacent to contracts are franchise states, where you can't really negotiate much and you don't have a lot of wiggle room. And the distributor is not obligated to let you go no matter what in most cases. So be careful who you're signing with. But as Robert mentioned, it's probably the only time you have any leverage to negotiate some performance points and things like that.
Yeah, I agree with you that I do think just trying to understand their side of it and trying to understand just being a good business partner. We signed contracts where the buyout was like, rolling 12 gross profit for 1 year. Like, if you leave somebody that's done a little good for you just because you don't like the sales manager's face, then I understand a little bit of a financial discomfort to do that. But trying to make somebody whole for 3 years or 5 years or something like that because you leave is a little egregious, I think. Pete, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, the contracts vary by state, right? So
Yeah.
you need to be very familiar with the market that you're negotiating in. Obviously, franchise states are probably the most tricky that you've really got to pay attention to. But then you've got open markets, control states, and every state's different. And very often the contracts, even if you're looking, or working with a national distributor, those contracts will vary by market. So don't assume because you have negotiated in market 1 that everything that you negotiated in market 1 will hold true in market 2. They're going to be very unique. Part and parcel to this, I mean, I think that, everybody's really focused on the divorce clause. What does it take to get out of this, right? Most of us don't want to get divorced if we're super happy in our marriage. Unfortunately, sometimes we're not super happy, and you've got to make sure that you've got the ability to get out. One of the things that we ran into that was a bit surprising with one of the big nationals was when we really dug into the fine print, we weren't just negotiating for market A, it had a carryover into other markets. So look out for that. Ultimately, what I would say is I would always hire an experienced attorney. And when I say experienced attorney, I mean someone who really has negotiated with this distributor in the past and understands kind of the rules of the road with that distributor. It's not necessarily always easy to find that attorney, but they're out there, and they're certainly worth the whatever it costs. If it's $1,000, it's probably worth $1,000 to make sure that this partner and you have great, as they say, good fences make for good neighbors, good contracts make for strong partnerships.
Pete, you were talking about having an open discussion with the distributor about what they could do and what you could do and what they needed and what you needed. How do you go about attaching? Because eventually you have to attach case movement to that, right? You have to create some sort of goal, KPI, along those lines. And is that before you go into a new market, do you kind of have an idea of what you would like for that market to do? Do you look at, if you've got somebody dedicated in that market, you want to make sure that they're, what you're paying them is flowing through to the added case sales that come your way? How do you go about attaching case sales to a new market? And then, when you're starting that relationship?
Yeah, I think that that's really tough. And so what you're asking is really, okay, where did you buy that crystal ball? And unfortunately, I don't own that, and we're wrong almost all the time, right? So
yeah, right.
we can try to look at other brands and market and kind of like pick your target. I mean, whose market share are you going after? Who do you want to emulate? But even so, I find that to be the most challenging thing, setting reasonable KPIs. And when I say reasonable, what's reasonable to a distributor or a broker might be very unreasonable to me.
Yeah.
We're not a big brand. We're not a big national brand. So incremental growth in a new market isn't acceptable. We're looking for orders of magnitude relative to growth. And if we don't get it, we won't live long enough to be successful in that market. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is really important is the importance of KPIs. I think that any relationship that's done with a broker, a distributor, or your own internal sales force ought to always be tied to performance. And I think it's really important that those performance metrics are really well identified and everybody understands the expectation in advance. But again, the magic comes is like, okay, what's reasonable? Okay, what's my stretch goal? And I think that's usually the challenge. And I would tell you that, finally, it's been kind of amazing to me, and the other guys may have a different experience. When I say to a broker or distributor, well, I want this tied to performance metrics, it's like, performance metrics? We just want to get paid. It's like, we've never heard of that before, but you really got to push for it.
Well, I know this will sound like a lobbying talking point for commission only and commission-based sales reps everywhere, but the truth is that protects your broker or your rep as well, because depending on what that KPI is and depending on how well it's defined, it isn't always just a stick for you to use. Sometimes when you look at that KPI together, you can say, okay, this is not what we wanted, but it's not necessarily your fault that it isn't what we wanted, and we recognize that, and let's change it and let's do something else. It isn't always a sledgehammer with which to threaten and levy punitive damages against a sales rep or a broker or a partner in your business.
Goes to a point Robert made about communication, and I think that's one of the things. Sometimes we get too busy to, if we're not scheduling regular meetings, We just see numbers and orders and depletion reports, and we don't have enough insight into what they all mean. So if we're communicating, and having that first conversation about what are the goals, and depending, and particularly in this market, your distribution partner might say, I don't know, but this is what we're seeing, and this is what we think we can accomplish. Let's check back in 3 weeks, and we'll give you, real feedback. And obviously, we also share texts and emails and whatnot in the meantime.
Yeah. Robert, you got anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think that's
I mean,
extraordinarily sound advice. I think the biggest thing too is when again, as Dave was mentioning with the KPIs, is understanding the market, understanding the thing. It's, making sure that, were you out at, of inventory for a period of time, and that could impact KPIs, and making sure that for me, every time we go in and we start working on some of these contracts, it's talking about, it's not necessarily that it's the hammer that falls with if you reach this KPI. This is what triggers, additional things as we start reaching these things. And there's KPIs you have to put on yourself, and KPIs you have to put on, you have to do the distributor. And I think it's making sure that they understand it's a partnership, and that you're going to be achieving certain things on your side as well. So for me, that's always been the way that I've had the most success of getting and talking about and establishing those KPIs, is establishing what you're going to do to help support that. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is making sure anytime you come into those negotiations, coming in with what you're going to provide. And, sometimes that is going to be liquid, a certain amount of liquid, but just because you produce the most amazing thing in the world, you need to make sure that you're coming in talking about what other things you're going to do around that.
yeah. Without giving away too much inside baseball, Robert, how do you develop your A&P budget for market, X? If you assume you're going to sell, 1,000 cases there the first year or whatever, I'm just picking a number. How do you determine what your spend is? And I can tell all three of you and everybody listening what the big corporation that I work for, I tell you what they used, and I bet it's a shocking number to you, but let's hear what you guys have to say first.
For me, first, I tie things to like a amount of spend per case that I'm wanting to push. And understanding that especially when you're breaking into new markets, that is going to be a much higher level than it will be once you have an established market. At least for us, that's the way typically that we do it. And we have it broken into, as far as tastings or other activities that we're going to do, and kind of piecing, all right, this much of, I'm going to be establishing my budget for my A&P, based on what my expectations for the sales are. And, it's one of those things that if you start going above that and you're not seeing the results, one, you got to go back again, talk to the distributor about what's going on, or trying to see kind of what's going on in the market in that area, to see if it's something that's an overall thing, or if there's something specifically you're doing. But in making sure, and if your spend has to be too much to actually achieve the goals that you've set in that market, it's one of those things that Pete was talking about before the thing started on, is that, you have to establish a margin. And if you can't meet your margin, it doesn't do any good for you to sell 30,000 cases if you're losing money with every single case that you're selling. So making sure that you're establishing kind of what your spends are and building that into some of your case prices. So.
Okay. Pete, you got any thoughts on building
so that's almost like exactly where I was going to go. I was going to say, let's pull it back to KPIs for a minute.
Yeah.
Because cases don't pay the bills, margin pays the bills. And then,
Right.
of course, there's a relationship. But at the end of the day, the margin that you take out of the market is what I believe you've got to be focused on. And frankly, your distributors and your reps have to be focused on. One more thing that I would say, again, about measuring KPIs, I run into this where I've got my own sales force and they're working along beside the distributors. Believe it or not everybody always tells the truth about who did what, and sometimes it becomes challenging to figure out, okay, who do I pay that to? Was it the distributor's rep? Was it my rep? And very often, as the brand manager, you're really trying to maintain these bridges and get people pulling in the same direction and get them feeling like they're supporting one another. But that's easier said than done, particularly when you've got performance-based metrics that, you know, impact people's pocketbooks. But back to the, how do you establish, you know, how much money we're going to spend in a market, you know, on SG&A or marketing or whatever, it's very tough. And I would say ultimately, it's got to come back to the margin. I can tell you there's markets where I was like more than $300 a case on a 6-bottle case. Those are markets that I probably either don't need to be in, or I need to do something really, really different, right? You know, I've heard numbers like, oh, well, the industry, you know, standard is $60 a case. I take those kind of metrics with a grain of salt. $60 a case based on what? You know, based on, I mean, what are we selling? Are we selling vodka? Or are we selling single barrel scotch or bourbon or what have you? So I would be, again, really reticent to take an industry standard and try to apply it to a very small brand. You got to go back to, you know, your own finances and look, okay, what are we spending? And at the end of the day, does that work into our budget?
Yeah, right. Dave?
I mean, I guess I start with the premise of putting good quality whiskey in a bottle at a really fair price, which, while maybe a good model, does not always equal great margins. So I tend to start from there, like, hey, this is a product you can and should be able to sell. And obviously that doesn't always work. So rather than having a specific budget, I'd look at the potential ROI of any particular option. And, you know, one is, you know, the easy ROI where you're making a profit on the margin. The other is, what are my goals here? Do I want to get this bottle in somebody's hands? And will this achieve that? And one of the things to be really careful with when you're playing, you know, the game that was created by bigger entities is, do you want to compete there? And do you want to spend a lot of money for placements that don't mean anything? That eventually will come back to bite you, because you should have been offering an incentive to be placed in, you know, every kind of convenience store, liquor store in California, where no one's looking at a $50 bottle of bourbon, you know, but the rep got a great, you know, a great a great payoff for it, and you're going to have all these placements, and those placements don't actually wind up as sales. It's actually going to be going against you in the long run. So
The best month Smooth Ambler ever had in the state of Massachusetts, we ran a incentive up there, and the reps for our distributor went, and they must have sold every Moose Lodge in the state of Massachusetts one bottle of Smooth Ambler, and then never sold them ever again anything at all. So yeah, you're right. I mean, you got to watch that stuff too.
Yeah, I recall, you know, being from New York, the standard, like, kind of, you know, everyday bar in
Right.
New York would have kind of a mirror set behind the bar. You know, there'd be everything that they use on the left side and the right side, and then there'd be this little spot of real estate between the two sides. Kind of, there's mirrors behind the bottles and all that, and there would be the land of misfit booze. And it was the combination of the rep owed this account a favor, so they gave them your bottles and somehow paid for, you know, these things happen because they're getting that incentive, or the account owed the rep a favor and they're taking those bottles. And having been in the land of misfit booze, no one respects it. And even if you sell through, they're just happy that it's gone. They never intended to reorder it. And it's really unfortunate, because you're spending money, people are spending effort, and it's just kind of an exercise people go through. So, you know, careful how you spend it.
So a small cousin to that point, and I want to hear from all three of you. Do store tastings build a brand, or do they just make the distributor and the retailer happy?
I'll start with that. I
All
have a
right.
strong opinion on that. And I'm going to use one of those cliches that I'll probably have to take a shot on later, right?
Oh, by the way, the first one of you to say liquid to lips owes me $20.
Oh, I was just going to say that. Okay, so what he said, he has to go take a shot. Hey, listen, consumer engagement is really, really important. Consumer engagement is super important. I cannot overemphasize it. So I'm going to tell you, for our brand, when we're sending people out, knowledgeable people, not agencies, but knowledgeable people who believe in the brand, are knowledgeable about the brand, and can speak passionately about the brand and educate the retailer and the consumer, we get huge dividends for that. So for us, I love tastings. Now, but it's got to be executed the right way. You can't send an agency out that doesn't know anything about the brand and assume that because that consumer liquid to lips, it was great, I'm going to buy it. It's the consumer engagement and the education piece and the liquid to lips. Those have to go together. One without the other doesn't matter.
Okay. Robert?
I'm going to reiterate that just doing tastings using tasting companies to go and do sales of your bottles, yeah, you might move that case off, but at the end of the day, those people may be influenced by the tasting they're having the next week, and it's not going to create continuous customer awareness and people coming back in to buy that bottle most of the time. It is what's going to be more effective when it comes to tastings is you or your distillers or your salespeople that really know, believe, and love the brand. That will bleed off into store employees, that will bleed off into customers. They're able to tell the stories that are actually meaningful, and that's what will ultimately create groundswell of what's going on. Just using tasters and paying people to stand in stores isn't gonna make the difference at the end of the day. You might move a case or two, but your cost to do that is well above what you're spending.
Yeah.
Or what you're making. Yeah.
Mr. Schmier.
Probably aligned with what Pete and Rob have said. I think, again, going back to the ROI, when you look at the cost of a tasting versus what somebody has committed to, generally there isn't an ROI, but there's more to it. Sometimes I'll do a tasting because I want to talk to people and get real feedback and see where things are. Nothing really beats being out in the field and talking to your customers, but you're also, sometimes your number one audience is that owner or buyer in that store. If somebody buys a barrel and they're supported by other products, and it's like, you want a tasting, we'll do two. But usually it's really good idea to take that opportunity and say, can we do something different? Can we create an event? Do you guys have a mailing list? Can we do, a bottle signing? You're launching a single barrel. Let's do it together. Do you ever do dinners with local restaurants? We'll do that with you. We're happier to do that with you than an in-store tasting, or maybe we'll do two, one after the other, like make better use of our time and that kind of thing. And also, being that we're talking about distributors and generally, often we treat them as the villains, rightfully so. But sometimes they surprise us. Oftentimes there'll be an event, like a big whiskey festival in a market. And I see it from all my distributors. It's like the sternly worded letter telling you, hey, we're real busy that week. Don't even think of trying to schedule not an in-store, but a work with or anything like that. We just don't have the time for you. Recently, my New Orleans distributor sent kind of the opposite of that letter and said, hey, we know a bunch of you are going to be in town, so we're going to set up a in-store event with all of you at a really big store on Wednesday night if you guys want to come in a day early. And it was one of the best in-store tastings that I've ever had, even with five other whiskey brands doing the same thing. And it was just really, really refreshing to see my distributor kind of like think and go, hey, these people are here. Let's take advantage of that.
Well, the part of this relationship, and this is another thing that, Pete, to your point about that conversation, is when you're talking about promotions with a distributor, or you're talking about incentivizing their staff, depending on who it is, you're going to be surprised that, I mean, the last time I scheduled a work with a distributor, I had to submit it 90 days in advance. Now that probably works for the big brands and for a whole team of people working out in the field. But when it's just you and you're trying to be, you have to be agile and pivot and respond to, you have to put fires out and you have to put fires under other people's feet. It's kind of hard for me to tell somebody in March that I absolutely will be, in Tampa in August, right? Like that's hard, but that's an ask. And I think that's negotiable, to your point. If you do it early and you make, like, listen, I understand there got to be some blackout dates, but, don't tell me I can't come in and do a whiskey dinner at bar XYZ just because some other suppliers in town, right? So let's talk a little bit about, by the way, you guys have been playing very nice so far. I appreciate it. I think there's a couple people from Southern actually on the call. So this will be, what are...
John, do you think they're eating lunch in an account and billing it back to a supplier?
Hey, I'll never forget. It was a guy. He worked for Pernod at the time, and he said, "This is the difference between working with an off-premise rep and an on-premise rep. The off-premise rep is going to pick you up at 7:30 in the morning. You're going to see 18 accounts. They're going to chain smoke all day long. You're going to skip lunch, and then they're going to drop you off 4 o'clock. The on-premise rep is going to pick you up about 11. You're going to go to the first stop, stay there for an hour and 45 minutes trying to catch the buyer. And then you're going to see another 7 accounts, and they're going to keep you out till 10 or 10:30 at night." And I found that to mostly be pretty damn close. But so, what are the pitfalls? I mean, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it the big lies, the pitfalls, the sucker bets. What are the things that that your ears are gonna love, but that your heart and your passion for your business and your mind as a supplier should be wary of? Dave, we can start with you.
Well, since you brought up work with, often people think, okay, I'm going to go out into the market with a rep and we're going to sell all this product. I think a good work with is where I spend less money on buying stuff I find in stores than I sell. They're not all they're cracked up to be. Some of them are great. But often it's a lot of that. We're trying to catch the buyer. You thought, we scheduled this 90 days ago. I thought maybe you would have some appointments, but much like an in-store tasting, it's what are the opportunities here? If you're going out there and saying, I'm traveling here and I'm doing these 2 days in the market, I better sell this much. You're probably not going to meet your expectations. But it's a really great opportunity to interact with the salesperson and make sure that you do a good enough job telling your story that the things that you can't convey in email, in paper, even in a Zoom call, that you can get them to tell your story while you're not with them. And the other thing too, much the same way that we've got fires to put out, make sure that the rep knows you appreciate their time and that, like, hey, when you need me to wait outside or kind of look around the store while you're dealing with some issue with your customer, let me know. Sometimes they don't, and they kind of, they don't enjoy having the supplier with them, believe it or not. But make sure you make use of that opportunity to gain a fan and then gain somebody who will think of you when opportunities come up.
Pete?
Yeah, I think that's super important what Dave just said. You got to make that rep believe in you, your brand, and your product, and that's the opportunity to do it and be sensitive to the fact that yeah, they've got other business they've got to conduct. That's very insightful. But going back to the question of what was the big lie, right? What makes your ears perk up? And I'm not, I don't know that it's a lie, but it's
Misrepresentation. Let's
it's
call
an
it not a
overcommitment.
lie.
It's an overcommitment. Let's just be clear. Distributors are just that. They distribute, right? They're not brand builders. And if a distributor tells you, hey, we're going to build this brand, we're going to make a big bet on this brand, I put almost no confidence in that. So we can't assume that, hey, I've got a distributor and now everything's great and I'm going to have this great brand and I'm going to sell it and blah, blah, blah. No, the distributor is going to do just what they're there to do. And that is warehouse the product and hopefully get it delivered to the account on time. All right.
Yeah.
And if you get anything else, it's a bonus. And so I think that we need to be realistic about what we expect from distributors. And if we buy into the story that the distributor is going to do all this work and they're going to have this sales force just dedicated to me, and a year now, down the road, I've got a 30,000, 50,000 case brand, shame on me, because I never should have set myself up for that. So I have realistic expectations. And like I said, when we first started, what I want to hear from the distributor is, no, we're not going to build your brand. We're going to help support you, but you've got to go build your brand. That's what I really want to hear. And if I hear anything else from the distributor, my antenna goes straight up.
Yeah. Yeah. Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the building on kind of what they've said. And, there are obviously differences between larger and smaller distributors of what they can do, what they are capable of, what expectations they have. But I think the biggest thing walking into working with a distributor is understanding that they have a portfolio of products. And sometimes, especially with the big guys, they may have 10 or 20 craft whiskeys from, your state, especially it's your home state. And expecting them to push and champion your product just because it's local, just because it's from where you are, is an unrealistic expectation of them. That at the end of the day, yeah, even though as the market's struggling and what all the different people are going through, you have to understand that the person that has to push and build the brand has to be you, has to be your own team. And that if you think just throwing money at the issue will solve and fix it, or that so and so is being successful because they have $200,000 marketing expenses, that's not always the case, and that's not always what's going to be driving especially the sales reps at your distributors. So this is one of the big things why I harp on communication and talking and knowing who your reps are, spending the time to go with the work with and following up with them, is to learn kind of who they are and what drives them and see where those things align together with you guys. Because that's, if you want them to present your product, if you want them to think about you, you need to be working on your end to be top of mind. Because that's beginning. If they have 600 whiskeys in their portfolio, for them to think of you, how often they can think of you, you need to understand kind of what the limitations are on that and make sure that your expectations are set appropriately. And that understanding that relationship building is going to be very heavily on your shoulders, whether that's going out with the on-prem, whether that's going out with the distributor, whether that's going out and working with the stores, all those things, it's going to fall on you until you become a big 100,000, 200,000 case brand. And then there's more leverage, but again, most of us don't exist in that world. And so just understanding that, talking with them and communicating with them, I think is the biggest thing on that. Yeah.
I want to add two sort of separate things. One is that I always said that you have to find a way to be either strategically important or significant to a distributor, or financially important, or significant to a distributor, hopefully both at some point. But very few people can start out being the second thing. Even if you have a robust A&P budget, as I said, in certain cases, it may just not work, fast enough, depending on what their calendar is. And they're only going to let you spend so much money anyway, because you can't go in and as I said, steamroll everybody else. But I don't think it can be, especially for a small brand, I don't think it can be undervalued about being well-liked in the portfolio, being, relatively as easy to sell as you can be for maybe a product that people aren't familiar with, that's usually a pretty healthy price point, and being relied upon in the market to not cause any friction with the rep, and to do whatever you say you're going to do, whatever you tell the rep that you're going to do, whatever you tell the retailer or the bar you're going to do. I mean, that's a lot, because it's shocking to me over the years how many reps, once I got to know them and they felt they could be a little frank with me about how, they would get behind a brand and then the owner would stop coming, or they'd ask for, 6 bottles of samples to do a golf tournament with, and the, supplier would tell them that they're crazy. That lack of support, once you get known for that, that'll nail your coffin shut pretty quick, I think. Yeah. And the other thing too is, let's not forget that in some of these distributors, well, let me put it this way, Pete, to your point about discussing with having really open and frank discussions with the distributor, I think part of that discussion also is understanding how their people are incentivized, not necessarily strictly by you, but in the greater book. I mean, is their middle management, are they incentivized on total, gross profit and case sales? Are they extra incentivized on maybe the craft portfolio that you happen to be in? Are they de-incentivized because there is no incentivization on that portfolio? Because I think a lot of times, especially in some of the big houses, one of the ugly truths is that you're not going to have a middle management portfolio manager or district person miss their $40,000 bonus because they sold too much of your small brand instead of another big brand, because the people that run and own that distillery don't want to sit in a boardroom with a major million dollar supplier and hear about how the numbers are down because they sold too much of your stuff. That I don't know how often that happens or how publicized that is. I know it's happened to me. And I just think when you're setting those expectations about, all right, well, what is the distributor really going to do for me? To your point, Pete, that's right. The distributor doesn't want to sell anything. They want to deliver product. And the activity that you get out of them above and beyond that is sort of icing on the cake a lot of the times. But you got to also understand that whatever your incentivization may be, there sometimes can be greater forces working against you. And by the way, I think that's just business. I don't think there are a bunch of people smoking big fat cigars in a boardroom somewhere trying to figure out how to screw over the little guy. I think it's just, unfortunately, with the 3-tier system and the history that we have, if you were a distributor and brand A pays you $1 million a year or brings in $1 million a year in gross profit, and a little guy brings in 20,000, whose phone call are you going to answer first? I mean, I think that's just a little bit of the business landscape.
But I want to.
So, John, you're saying to stay away from big distributors.
No, I'm saying to have brutally realistic expectations for any size distributor partner you have, big or small.
So I want to just interject an observation that I've made personally, just with our experience with distributors and our brand. And that is that there's nothing nefarious going on. Okay.
Right.
They're not out to get us, period. I don't believe that. The fact is that everybody is spread thin and there's only so many resources to go around. And, as Darwinism would dictate, you're going to take care of yourself first. And, let's face it, I'm not Brown Foreman. So I'm going to be much lower on that priority chain. And I don't blame them for that. That's good business. But it's not binary. It's not just because they're not out building my brand. It doesn't mean they don't care about me. And this goes back to both Robert and Dave's point, is relationships are critical. We want these people to believe in us and we want them to feel great about us. And they can do that, but don't expect just because they believe in us and they feel great about us that we're going to get a ton of their attention because they don't have it to give. So both of these things can exist simultaneously, and frankly, they do. We want the distributor and the reps to think we're the greatest thing. Yes, I'm going to send you those samples for that golf tournament. Yes, I'm going to be in market to support you. But at the same time, I don't expect you to spend 10% of your time working on my brand, because that's an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah. I mean, if you guys think about it, it's the same thing with us in retail stores. You may have a really amazing independent store that sells a really high volume for a single store, but you can't spend every single weekend of your time in that store pushing product at that one store. Especially if there's, some of the bigger chains and stuff that come to you, you're going to have to spend some time, you know, helping out the bigger chains as well and going to the bigger chain stores and doing some of those things that you can't spend all your time just on one spot and one little thing. You have to remember that you can't do that and stay in business, and they can't do the same thing. So that, I think it's that correct expectations of what you're going to receive, especially looking at the house that you're in and the distributor that you're working with.
Pete, I didn't want to interrupt if you had something you wanted to add.
No.
This is the last kind of thing on my list, and then there's a bunch of questions in the Q&A that we'll go over and talk about a couple of other things. But, in the new streamline, at least compared to what it was a couple of years ago, in the new DTC landscape, are any of you guys using, how much of that is your business? I know that you're all probably doing that to a certain extent, but how much of that is a part of your focus? And are you used currently, or have you used in the past and had any success with what I'll call the Park Street model? And for people that are on the webinar, if you don't understand what that is, Park Street, and they're not the only one, but depending on your appetite for case sales and growing the brand and how you want to do it, there are some people that feel like, well, if I'm going to go do the work anyway, there are companies like Park Street that are not a traditional distributor in the sense of having a sales force, but they can essentially, deliver your product, for you, for a fee. It kind of removes, they work as a de facto distributor, with a different sort of in-house team. And for example, you would use this, let's say, pick any city. If you lived in Denver for 30 years and 5 good retailers and 5 good bars, that because you're you and they want to support you, you're interested in the product, you wouldn't necessarily have to go the traditional route. So I guess whether it's that version or some other non-traditional path to getting your stuff distributed, including self-distribution, if you're I know, Pete, you can't do that down in North Carolina, but I'm not sure about Texas. And Dave, you may have that going on in some markets.
Broker, we can't self-distribute. There's a difference.
Self-distribute, right? Yeah, right.
Self-broker.
But anyway, whatever you want to call it, alternative paths to the traditional hire a distributor, try and incentivize them, and then work the market traditionally. Has anything worked? Have you tried anything that's outside of that realm that seems to have gotten some velocity?
I was gonna say, for me, I haven't done any direct, I guess, major work in any market on the Park Street side. For us, obviously, direct to consumer is a really important thing. One, if you have people engaged at your own facilities, but also people being able to mail stuff across the country. If you are able to do that, one of those things that you can do is start working on it, taking that information, and when you want to go enter a market fully, especially if it's outside your home market where you can't self-distribute, having that data of hey, we already send this many bottles of product into this state on a yearly basis or into this area. And you can use some of that data to show, we already have some interest in your product, and that can help attract distributor, can help part of the calculus and the discussions with the distributor that you're already seeing support, you're already seeing pull through, in certain areas. So to me, that can also be helpful of even looking at what states you want to go to next. So if you have the ability to work through that or to work with one of the online retailers, see if you can, when you talk with them, if you can get some data on the sales of where things are going and where areas you're seeing big support, because that can help you down the line as far as your negotiations and even knowing what market to tackle next. So to me, that's a really big important part of that, to know, where support already exists for you.
Yeah. Dave, anything?
Too much. Going back to my first product, I sold through MHW in New York, same as Park Street, and American Spirits Exchange is who I use now, and they also have the same opportunity in some markets to basically sell without the traditional distributor. The downside is you're responsible for doing all the sales and collecting all the invoices, which can be challenging. The upside is it gives you a pathway where you might not have any. And also, much like doing an in-store tasting, you're not going to do it for the long run, but going out and selling your product yourself to accounts gives you a good insight into what people are thinking, also gives you good insight into what your distributors are dealing with on a daily basis. So there's that. I think there's some people who've really harnessed the D2C, where they have clubs online and they have a built-in audience. I've shied away from some of that, thinking I didn't want to step on my distributors and my retailers. There's a balance there, I think. Another opportunity too, on the same topic, is the opportunity that Lib did before its people. And while it's not efficient, and in some cases you're lucky to break even, what it does do is now opens up markets for you where there are people who've heard about your product, but you don't yet have a distributor. As a small brand, you might only be looking at 10 to 20 cases in a given market, and that's a tough discussion to have with most distributors. That, yeah, we're going to do 10 to 20 cases. You don't really have to do anything. We do have demand for it. And then they start asking their normal questions of how many feet are you putting on the street, and you're like, no, I just want to sell 20 cases a month in your market. These are the people who want it. And if you don't get a distribution partner, now you have an opportunity to fulfill those orders and eventually build upon them to where you can be profitable in that market.
Mm-hmm. Pete?
Yeah, that was a huge question, because you touched on DTC, you touched on Park Street, you touched on brokers and distributors, and somewhere in there I heard control state. So
not for me. I just
okay.
alternative
But anyway,
paths to distribution.
so I'm
to
gonna take those three, but I'm gonna try to be efficient in my response. So DTC, it's real. Okay, it's a real thing. It's gonna happen. There are impediments, primarily the 3-tier system. And as long as the 3-tier system is there, it creates a hurdle for DTC to really operate effectively and efficiently. I don't know whatever happens with the 3-tier system, but even if it's still in place, I think that DTC will happen. And I think that a lot of the big distributors recognize that, and they've made investments in those DTC channels, understanding that that's kind of the future of commerce. But I don't think anybody's doing it great right now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's super confusing. So there's people who offer marketing for brands. There are people who offer fulfillment for brands. There are people who offer, oh, we're going to deliver it to a retailer, and so you've got to really understand, okay, what do all of these people do and how do they fit into the puzzle? And it's very confusing. I believe it is anyway. I don't know of anybody who's built a really, really strong business using DTC, but I think that it will come. I think that right now it's super important to small brands. And here's why. You've got a brand that's like Iron Root Republic, super, well known in Texas and probably really well known in more niche markets, but they can't really set up distribution and sales in those markets, but they want to support that fan base. DTC is the way to do that. So it's hugely important as we gain traction and we want to move into markets. So it's a way to kind of pre-game in some of those markets. Park Street, we use Park Street. I don't use them necessarily the way that you indicated. I don't use them as a distributor. I use Park Street along beside distributors to take care of the back office stuff that's required. I won't get into the nuance of that, but we've also used MHW in those markets. They provide a valuable service, because if they didn't do it, I would have to hire internal staff to do it, but they work along beside my distributors, not in lieu of or replacement of the distributors. And finally, we've not really talked about brokers, but we've also used brokerages. But, it took me a long time to really understand what a broker does or is supposed to do. But again, they don't really take the place of a distributor. In my world, a broker is instead of my boots on the ground, I'm renting a little bit of somebody else's boots on the ground. So it's more of a sales service that, again, is intended to operate along beside the distributor, but it is not cheap. And in our experience, very few brokers have really impressed us with their ability to be meaningful in supporting and building my brand. So,
yeah, I found that distributors have a kind of a wonky relationship with brokers. It depends on the broker. If they love the broker, then they're all about it. If you hire
usually it's like this.
Yeah. Although the broker doesn't tell you that, and the distributor doesn't tell you, you got to find that out later.
No, actually, my distributors are very loud in my ear.
Okay, well, good. Good.
I was like, oh my God, I hear you. I hear you.
What you'll find is that, if the distributor doesn't have a good relationship, not you guys know this, but on the attendee, what you're going to find is the distributors don't have a good relationship with a broker. Or let's say you hire somebody for a market and it's not a known entity in the industry, it's somebody's cousin or whatever. You're going to find the distributors go initially a little reluctant to have that person marched into all of their best accounts by the, because they don't know that person. They don't, if you've worked the market, as we keep talking about having a personal relationship with the, what I call with the marketplace, with, inside with the customers, with the distributor people, and with the distributor heads and with the distributor reps, they're sometimes the distributor doesn't want that strange entity that they know nothing about going into their key account. So, that's something to consider too.
Yeah, air traffic control gets to be an issue. You don't want mid-air collisions.
I think
That's
sometimes
exactly right.
you have the other effect where the broker is doing a great job and the distributor kind of takes a back seat and just lets them do everything, and they're not pushing anything forward. Where if you have, and I tend not to use brokers, but I've had some good experiences. But if everyone's working together, and back to that word of communication, which I've failed to do that many times, but if you have the communication right, then you can have a situation where 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah. Well, gents, thank you very much for taking part in this and answering my calls about getting on here with me. I really like these formats, and I hope to do more of these, based around a topic, and have really frank discussions from people who have lived it and dealt with it. And as I told you guys when we started, the procedural presentations, particularly when it has to do with production or something like that, are important. And I certainly won't stop having those, but I hope to have more of these kinds of things, because I learned something. I know a lot of people on the webinar do as well. We're 1 hour and 20 in. Let's hit some of these Q&A questions real quickly, and then I'll let you guys go. But I do wanted to publicly say that I really appreciate you guys being here for this. So the first question is, here in Florida, the little guys can be great, but they're in the panhandle, so it's hard for the small wholesalers to even service their service area. how can we get them to take us seriously when these small guys are struggling just as hard as the big guys, but can't seem to weather the storm? How do you get, if you're a small guy, you're struggling and you're inside of a distributor who's struggling. I mean, what can you do other than, I think what we've mentioned is just figure out some way to carve out some space inside the share of mind. There's another key word. I'll take another shot. Share of mind inside the distributor for your business. Anybody got some insight or a hack for that?
I mean, I think the best advice I could give on that is to call up the distributor, set a meeting with them, and have a frank discussion of what reality really looks like. How often are they going to get into that area? Whether they can get into that area or not at all, or whether they're going to have to shut down that area. Just making sure that you're understanding where they're at and making sure that they're being honest with you on that the best you can. And when you do that, try to figure out ways, whether that's, talking with some of your locals of, maybe understanding, hey, you're only going to get a delivery once a month. Can we do, 3 cases rather than 1 case? Can we do some of these things to help set it up, to help you continue your longevity in your local area? But I think just doing your best to have those frank and honest conversations with the distributor so that you can understand what you're up against and what you're really going to deal with, so you can try to game plan against it. Right? That's the best you can do on that situation.
The next question is, what can a small distillery that is putting virtually every dollar back into the distillery, how do you even find an A&P budget or any kind of promotional monies for that? And I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about that. I mean, I think the question is the answer, but Pete, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, you just got to work with what you got, right? I mean, it's the reality. Work with what you got, and if you don't have the budget, you don't have the budget. If your budget is really limited, then just think about what's going to give me the best bang for the buck. And if it's a brand that small, you're going to be doing a lot of that yourself. I mean, you are the budget. It's going to be your blood, sweat, and tears, your personal equity that you're investing, because more often than not, the budget's not there.
Yeah, I would say, with no budget or meager budget, do what you can to amplify your tasting room, your HQ experience. Make as much profit as you can at ground zero if you can't spend $5,000 a month trying to work New York City.
Johnny, you said something earlier. I can't remember exactly what the phrase was. Help me. You said something about you've got to win something first. What did you say?
Me?
Yeah. It was something about a yard. What did you say?
I don't remember. What did I say?
Oh, Lord. Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, wait. Pete, you got to win in your backyard, is what Pete's trying to say.
That's it.
Yeah. Goodness. Sorry. So we got liquid to lips, win in your backyard.
100%.
100%. Sorry,
Okay.
it took me a minute to get there, Pete. But yeah, I think
we all have heard that a million times. Nobody loves you more than your neighbors.
Right.
Get your neighbors to become disciples and let those disciples spread the good word forth.